They say the oldest ruins on earth do not speak in words, but in echoes. Beneath the wind, beneath the dust, there is a hum that never fades, a vibration older than history itself. What if those stones remember something we have forgotten? What if the world we know is only the shadow of another, built before time learned to measure itself? From the deserts of Mesopotamia to the mountains of Lebanon, traces of a vanished age still breathe beneath our feet. Foundations carved by hands too vast, too precise to belong to us. Were they giants, gods, or something in between? And if they once walked the earth, what did they build? And why did they vanish? Tonight, we journey beyond the boundaries of recorded history into the hidden corridors of myth, archaeology, and memory. We will follow the whisper that threads through every civilization, the story of a tower that reached for heaven and the beings who dared to build it. Welcome to Cryptic Realm, where the forgotten speaks again. If mystery stirs your imagination, remember to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts below. Every voice adds another stone to the tower of discovery we build together. Now, let us begin. They say there was a time before time, a dawn when mountains were soft, when the sky itself was young, and the air shimmered with a strange density, as if creation had only just cooled from the breath of the divine. In those distant centuries, when myth and matter still touched, something descended from above. The ancient texts called them watchers, beings of light who looked upon the daughters of men and felt for the first time the pull of mortal desire. From their forbidden union came the Nephilim, the giants of the first age, creatures whose height rivaled the cedars of Lebanon, whose voices were said to roll like thunder across the valleys. It was the age before the flood, when the earth and the heavens were not yet strangers. Humanity lived close to the soil, but the Watchers brought knowledge that was never meant to be known. They taught the secrets of metal and flame, of shaping stone to defy gravity, of reading the language of the stars. What began as wonder soon turned to hunger. With every gift came a cost, for knowledge, once awakened, cannot return to silence. The humans called their teachers gods, and the giants became their architects, builders of impossible structures that reached toward the sun as if to reclaim the light that had cast their fathers down. Among the plains that now belong to Lebanon, near the site of Baalbek, the earth still bears their fingerprints. Massive stones, each weighing hundreds of tons, lie fitted with such precision that no blade can pass between them. Archaeologists measure and debate, but the riddle endures. No tool of known antiquity could have moved them. Some whisper of lost technologies, others of sound itself used as an instrument of lifting. The ancients spoke of resonance, of commanding matter through vibration, shaping the world with tone. Perhaps they remembered what the Watchers once knew, that creation itself began with sound, with a word spoken into the void. Yet even power has its season. The Book of Enoch tells that the giants grew restless, consuming the earth's harvest, then its beasts, and finally its people. Their towers rose higher with every passing century, monuments of defiance carved in the likeness of their ambition. But the higher they climbed, the further they fell from the balance that once bound heaven and earth. The old harmony broke, the skies grew heavy, and then came the silence that precedes judgment. The rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights, not as mercy, but as erasure. The flood swept across the world like the closing of a great book, washing clean the pages of history written by those who had forgotten humility. When the waters withdrew, nothing remained but ruin and rumor. The towers were gone, the giants were dust, and mankind began again, smaller, quieter, haunted by the memory of something vast. But the stones remained, silent, unmoving, enduring. In their weight there is a language, a message carved not in words but in precision. Those who study them say the alignments of ancient sites across the earth, Baalbek, Giza, Sumer, follow patterns written in the stars. Coincidence, perhaps, or perhaps the survivors of that vanished world left behind more than legend. They left a map, and so the question lingers. Were the Watchers real, or merely the reflection of our own desire to reach beyond what we are? If they were myths, why do their fingerprints remain in granite? If they were gods, why did they fall? History begins where memory ends, but between the two lies the echo of something older, a hum beneath the dust, calling us to listen again. What if the flood did not end their story? What if the world itself still dreams of the day when its first builders will return? When the waters withdrew, the world awoke to silence. Mountains stood pale and bare, stripped of their green, their peaks still glistening with the memory of salt. Valleys yawned open where oceans had passed, and the air itself seemed changed, thinner, emptied, as though the planet was learning to breathe again. The survivors looked upon the vast emptiness and saw fragments of what had been. Shattered stones half buried in the mud, tools that no human hand could have forged, carvings of faces eroded but not forgotten. They whispered of the age before the flood, the time of the giants, when the earth had walked with its head among the clouds. And though the old world had drowned, its shadow remained in memory. Those who lived carried stories in their bones. They spoke of luminous beings who had taught mankind the arts of shaping, of measuring, of understanding the stars. In Sumer, they called them the Anunnaki, those who descended from the heavens in flame. In Egypt, they carved their images as gods with shoulders of stone and eyes that never blinked. Across lands divided by language and sea, the same echo returned. Tall figures robed in light, teaching, building, vanishing. The flood had erased their works, but not the remembrance of their presence. Myths are not born from nothing. They are the fossils of forgotten truth. Archaeologists speak of layers, strata of clay and limestone stacked like pages in a buried book. In Mesopotamia, those layers tell of a catastrophe, a time when every city was drowned and rebuilt. Beneath the ruins of Babylon, deeper than the oldest ziggurat, lie foundations that predate civilization itself. Some call the place Etemenanki, the temple of the foundation of heaven and earth. Later generations would call it the Tower of Babel. Yet the deeper stones, darker and heavier, belong to an age before Babel, before even the first written word. They are shaped with a precision beyond explanation, their geometry whispering of hands that remembered the old alignment between heaven and earth. The priests who tended those ruins spoke in riddles. They said the tower once bound the stars to the soil, that its peak shone like a mirror for the gods. But the heavens grew sorrowful, for beauty built in pride cannot endure. When storms gathered over its summit, the people swore they heard voices, thunder speaking in forgotten tongues. Scholars in later ages would dismiss this as legend, yet the resonance of that tale lingers in every culture that followed. the fall of a bridge between worlds. In Babylon, ziggurats rose again, each layer painted to reflect the color of the heavens, black for the night, red for the dawn, blue for the infinite. The Egyptians followed another path, aligning their pyramids to the belt of Orion, as though guided by a celestial map older than their dynasties. The same impulse stirred the Phoenicians, the Mayans, the builders of every sacred platform that reached skyward. Different lands, different names, but one idea, the restoration of a link that the flood had broken. Humanity could no longer remember how to speak with the gods, so it learned to build in silence. Even now, fragments of that longing endure. The bricks of ancient Babel still bear marks of reeds pressed by human hands 5,000 years ago. The clay tablets speak of languages divided, of a unity shattered when man reached too high. But perhaps the confusion of tongues was not a punishment, it was protection. To speak one language again might mean to repeat the same desire, to rebuild the same tower that once summoned ruin. The division preserved the world until it could understand itself. Every civilization that followed carried a shard of the first dream. The Greeks told of titans who stormed Olympus, their ambition so vast that even thunder could not silence it. The Norse sang of a bridge of light called Bifrost, linking Midgard to the realm of the gods. The Aztecs built temples whose stairways mirrored the steps of heaven. Beneath the poetry of their myths runs the same current, a memory of ascent, of something once achieved and lost. When modern excavators uncovered the ruins of Eridu, the oldest of Sumer's cities, they found layers upon layers of rebuilding, each one older than the last. At the deepest level, beneath temples and tombs, lay a platform of burnt brick fused by heat no ancient fire could have produced. Some suggest volcanic activity, others lightning. But there were no volcanoes there, and the pattern of melting followed design, not chaos. It was as if the stones themselves had been softened in the hands of their makers. The same mystery appears in other corners of the earth, at Baalbek, at the pyramids, at sites half a world apart, yet built upon the same principles. Could these have been fragments of one global memory, scattered by the flood and reborn as myth? The question stirs unease in the halls of reason, but wonder has its own logic. To deny every echo is to silence the very thing that made us human, the urge to remember. The builders of the first tower may have vanished, but their design persists in the bones of the world, in the ratios of temples and the rhythm of stars. Perhaps the flood did not erase them at all. Perhaps it merely translated their story into stone and sky, waiting for us to learn its language again. As dusk falls over the ruins of Mesopotamia, the wind moves through the broken bricks like breath through a flute. The tone is low, almost human, a whisper of history reminding us that time is not a straight line, but a circle. What once was lost will seek to rise again. The tower's shadow lengthens across the ages, unseen yet unforgotten. If its foundations still sleep beneath the earth, what else might wait beside them? Stones, secrets, or the memory of hands that once shaped the world? And if we ever find those hands in our own reflection, will we be ready to lift what they left behind? Long after the flood and the first rebuilding of cities, the earth began to reveal its secrets again. The wind uncovered what the waters had concealed, and the sands of forgotten empires parted like the pages of a buried book. Travelers came from far-off lands, scribes, wanderers, seekers, drawn not by conquest but by curiosity. They carried stories of pillars standing alone in deserts, of stone blocks so vast that even the strongest beasts could not have moved them, of mountains that looked carved rather than born. Some called these places the remnants of the giants, others the footprints of the gods. Whatever they were, they proved one thing. Something immense had once walked the face of the world. In the northern hills of Lebanon, the ruins of Baalbek still breathe beneath the sun. 3 monoliths rest in the foundation, each weighing more than 1,000 tons. They are called the trilithon, stones so large that even modern cranes struggle to imagine their lifting. Beneath them, even older blocks sleep half-buried, fused to the bedrock with no visible joint or seam. When the Romans arrived, they built their temple of Jupiter atop those ancient foundations, confident in their mastery of engineering, yet unaware, or unwilling to admit, that they were building upon the bones of something far older. The locals called the site Hajar al-Hibla, the stone of the pregnant woman, for it seemed to contain within it a living power. To them, Baalbek was not merely ruin, but residue, a fortress of the giants, humming faintly with memory. Far to the east, Mount Hermon rises like a sentinel between heaven and earth. The air there feels different, charged, thinner, as though sound itself hesitates before crossing its peaks. In the old writings it was called the Mountain of the Oath, for it was said that here the watchers swore their covenant when they first descended, vowing to share the knowledge of the stars with mankind. Shepherds who graze their flocks along its slopes still tell stories of a white light that hovers over the stones on certain nights, a glow without flame, silent yet alive. Scientists describe it as ionized air, a trick of temperature and particle charge. But to those who listen to the mountain rather than measure it, the light is something else, a breath, a heartbeat, the residue of an ancient promise. The pattern repeats across the world, as if an invisible hand once drew the same geometry upon every continent. In the plains of Sumer, the ziggurats rise layer by layer toward the sky, their steps painted to mirror the heavens. In Egypt, the pyramids still catch the same starlight that once shone on the builders of Baalbek, their sides aligned with a precision that defies the instruments of their supposed age. Across the sea, on islands half a world away, megaliths stand in silence, their alignment echoing the constellations above. The same proportions appear again in the Andes, in Malta, in the valleys of Cambodia. Oceans divide them, but their design sings the same song, the language of number, of balance, of harmony. Coincidence cannot compose such a melody. Scholars, cautious by nature, speak of parallel development, different cultures solving the same problems through similar means. Yet the stones themselves resist that simplicity. They whisper of continuity, not coincidence, of a shared inheritance older than memory. Could it be that fragments of the Watcher's knowledge survived the flood, carried by wanderers who remembered only its shape, not its source? Or is there something deeper, a rhythm that moves through humanity itself, compelling us to build toward the same vision again and again? As explorers brushed away the dust, they uncovered signs too deliberate to dismiss. The Great Pyramid's base matches the circumference of the Earth when measured by its own geometry. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia mark the courses of planets invisible to the naked eye. The platform at Baalbek aligns with solstice light that passes precisely through its stones. Each site is a page in a book written in mathematics, as if the builders had sought to record not words, but harmony itself. To stand among those ruins is to feel that the world was once tuned like an instrument, and that we are the fading echo of its last note. But what of the builders themselves? Were they remnants of the old giants who survived the flood, or ordinary men guided by memory? Ancient myths speak of kings who were two-thirds divine, of sages who could command the winds and read the stars. The Sumerian king lists record reigns lasting tens of thousands of years, numbers so large that modern minds dismiss them as symbols, yet the ancients wrote them with conviction. Perhaps they meant not years as we count them, but cycles, ages of harmony between man and the cosmos, broken and renewed. In every civilization that rose upon the ruins of the flood, the same transformation occurred. Knowledge became reverence. What had once been an act of rebellion turned into worship. The builders of stone became the priests of light. Their hands no longer reached upward in defiance, but in remembrance. Yet even in that devotion lay a question. Were they honoring the gods, or trying quietly to restore the bridge their ancestors had lost? As the sun sets over Baalbek, the last light slips across the face of the stones, tracing lines invisible at noon. The air vibrates faintly, carrying the echo of the day into night. To the passerby, it is nothing, just wind between ruins. But to the one who listens, it is a whisper, the same tone that threads through every legend, every prayer, every question humanity has ever asked of the stars. If these places were once connected, if the same builders walked from Lebanon to Egypt to Summer, what were they seeking to complete? A monument to power or a ladder of light? And if their work was destroyed, why does its pattern continue to rebuild itself through us, age after age, as if the earth itself refuses to forget? As centuries passed, the dust of the old empires settled, and the tower ceased to be a structure of stone. It became a structure of memory. It lived not in the hands that built, but in the tongues that told. Around fires and altars, through the chants of priests and the lines of poets, the image of that ancient ascent changed its shape. What had once been an act of reaching now became a symbol of warning. Where the giants had sought to rise beyond the limits of flesh, their descendants spoke instead of a fall. The tower turned from monument to mirror, reflecting the oldest dream of humankind: to rise, to understand, to become more than we are. In Babylon, where languages flowed like rivers, the story hardened into myth. The tower, they said, had reached so high that its summit pierced the dwelling of the gods. But the divine, jealous of human unity, scattered their speech, breaking one tongue into many. Scholars call it the myth of Babel, the confusion of tongues. Yet beneath the surface of that tale lies something older, not a story of punishment, but of preservation. Perhaps the scattering was a mercy, not a curse. For if the people had truly reached the heavens, what would they have found there? The reflection of their own desire staring back, or the silence of something that no longer wished to be known? Among the Hebrews, the story took another form. The giants were no longer teachers or builders, but abominations, remnants of a union that should never have been. The Watchers were cast not as bearers of light, but as the first rebels against order. In their telling, the tower was a continuation of that same rebellion, a human attempt to reopen the gate sealed since Eden. Yet even within the condemnation, there was awe. The scriptures whispered of those mighty men of old, men of renown, whose deeds could not be forgotten. It was as if the human heart could not decide whether to fear or to long for the beings it had once called gods. Farther west, the Egyptians told the story differently. To them, ascent was not defiance but alignment. In the city of Heliopolis, the priests spoke of the Benben, the sacred stone that fell from the heavens, upon which the first god stood to raise the sun. Every pyramid they built was a reflection of that descent of light, a stairway not of rebellion but of resurrection. Each angle was a prayer, each chamber a map of the soul's return to the stars. They spoke not of punishment but of harmony, of a universe in balance between heaven and earth. Yet even there, in the golden calm of their temples, the echo of the old longing lingered. The precision of their architecture, the alignment to Orion and Sirius, revealed that they too sought to touch what lay beyond their reach. The Greeks remembered the story as war. In their tales, the giants rose from the earth itself, born of Gaia, to storm the citadel of Olympus. They piled mountains upon mountains, clawing at the sky, until Zeus hurled his thunderbolts and cast them down. The Gigantomachy, they called it, the battle between the divine and the daring. But listen closely, and you can hear the same pulse, the struggle between what is bound and what yearns to be free, to rise, to fall, to leave behind the memory of height. The myth of the tower, like a melody that cannot die, echoed beneath every civilization, each giving it new words but never changing its tune. When philosophers began to speak instead of poets, the tower transformed once more. The ascent became inward. Plato wrote of the soul's climb from the shadows of ignorance toward the realm of perfect light. Knowledge became the ladder, and truth the summit. The old dream survived, only wearing new robes. In his dialogues, the philosopher's voice carried the same longing that once guided the hands of the builders, a yearning to bridge the gap between what is seen and what is eternal. Even in the quiet cells of monks centuries later, that same yearning would whisper through prayer. To rise without falling, to reach without defying. Perhaps the tower was never destroyed. Perhaps it still stands, invisible but alive, within the architecture of our longing. Every discovery, every act of creation, every rebellion against ignorance is another stone laid upon its foundation. We build it with thought now instead of marble, with language instead of limestone. Its height is measured not in meters, but in meaning. And yet the question remains, can we climb without repeating the fall? The ruins of Babel crumble beneath the sands of Iraq, but their echo endures in every skyscraper that pierces a modern sky. We may no longer worship the sun with gold or carve the names of gods upon the walls, yet the instinct survives. To rise, to build, to prove that we can. In every tower of glass and steel, there is the same pulse as in the stones of Baalbek, the same heartbeat that once shook the plains of Shinar. Humanity has never ceased to reach upward. It has only changed its tools. When the wind sweeps through those ruins today, it carries a whisper that sounds almost human. The same rhythm that once moved through the chants of Babylon still lingers in the hum of electricity. The language may have scattered, but the song never stopped. Each age translates it anew, from stone to scroll, from scripture to science. The melody of ascent remains. If the tower truly fell, then why do we still build? If the lesson was to humble us, why does the desire endure? Perhaps we were never meant to stop climbing, only to remember why we began. The ruins may be silent, yet silence itself can speak. Every block, every carved line, every vault that still stands carries a faint resonance, a vibration tuned not to the ear, but to the earth. Long before words were etched into clay, before writing even existed, there was sound. The ancients believed the world began with it, a single tone, a word of creation that set matter into motion. In their temples, they sought not only to praise that sound, but to recreate it. The first builders, it is said, did not fight against gravity. They sang with it. They built not through brute force, but through harmony. Legends whisper that in Egypt, priests could lift stone by voice alone. Their chants filled the air with tones that made the granite tremble until it rose like breath. In Tibet, far across mountains, the ancients never knew by name. Monks still strike bronze bowls whose vibrations seem to hang in space, shaping invisible walls of sound. Science calls it frequency, but the old languages called it power, the hidden pulse of creation itself. The Watchers, those first teachers of forbidden knowledge, were said to have revealed this secret, that every object, every particle, every being possesses a natural resonance. To know its name was to command it. Modern instruments, centuries later, have proven a fragment of that truth. Within the chambers of the Great Pyramid, researchers have found that a single human voice, perfectly pitched, can make the air vibrate in harmony with the stone. The tone aligns with the rhythm of a heartbeat. It is as if the structure itself breathes, a dialogue between matter and life. The ancients may not have spoken of hertz or decibels, but they understood what those words only describe: the music of existence. At Baalbek, when the wind moves through the hollows of the great stones, a low hum can be felt rather than heard. Some call it coincidence, the wind's mischief among ruins. But those who linger speak of an energy that seems to awaken as the air cools, a soft vibration beneath the feet. It is the same hum that lives in the shell of the earth, in the whisper of wind through canyons, in the ringing silence of deep caves. Perhaps the builders did not merely raise monuments, perhaps they tuned them, shaping the world into an instrument that could speak with the heavens. Ancient writings from Mesopotamia tell of the tones of ascent, frequencies that mirrored the music of the spheres, the celestial harmony said to guide the movement of stars. Each layer of the tower, they claimed, was aligned to one of these notes, so that when the wind passed through its corridors, the structure would sing. Whether literal or metaphorical, the meaning remains the same. The builders sought communion through vibration, through sound. In their eyes, creation was not a battle, but a symphony, and to build was to participate in its rhythm. Modern science, centuries removed from myth, has returned to a similar language. Physicists now study cymatics, the patterns formed when sound touches matter. Grains of sand, stirred by tone upon a metal plate, shape themselves into spirals, stars, mandalas. Each frequency creates a new design, a geometry born not of hand, but of vibration. The universe, it seems, hums its own architecture. The ancients may have understood this intuitively. Their temples, their towers, their monuments, all resonate to frequencies found in nature, the pulse of the planet, the rhythm of the tides, the whisper of wind across stone. If the giants truly existed, perhaps their strength was not in muscle but in memory. They may have carried within them the knowledge of that first sound, the tone that called the universe into being. To command stone, to move mountains, to lift what should not be lifted. Such acts would not be miracles, but harmony rediscovered. The Tower of the Giants, then, may not have been merely a structure of rock and mortar. It may have been an instrument, a resonant bridge between worlds, its fall not only physical but tonal, a silence imposed upon the earth that has lasted ever since. Across civilizations, the memory of that sound persists. The Sumerians called it Mi, the divine measure that sustained order. The Egyptians named it Mat, the balance that binds all things. The Greeks spoke of the music of the spheres. The Hindus called it Om, the vibration from which the cosmos was born. Different tongues, same truth. Beneath all creation lies a single note, and to hear it is to remember where we came from. When one stands among the ruins at dusk, there is a moment, just before night fully takes the light, when everything seems to pause. The wind softens, the insects hush, and the air grows thick with expectation. It is in that breath that the ancient hum can almost be felt again, deep within the bones. The silence is not empty. It is full. It waits, as if for someone to answer. Perhaps it has always been waiting. And so the question lingers, the same one the old builders must have asked before the first stone was laid. Did we lose the power to move mountains, or only the will to listen? If the world still sings, who among us remembers the words? They once descended in light. That is how the oldest stories remember them. The Watchers, the sons of heaven, who crossed the veil between worlds to walk among the daughters of men. In the beginning, they were radiant, their faces bright with the knowledge of the stars, their voices gentle like wind through glass. They came not as conquerors but as givers, bearers of wisdom that promised to raise humanity from darkness. They taught the language of metals and herbs, the art of writing, the reading of the heavens, and the secret laws by which fire could be shaped to serve rather than destroy. And for a time, the world was blessed. But light, when it enters shadow, does not remain pure. Their leader was named Azazel, though the name changes as it travels through centuries. Some called him Shemyaza, others Kokobel, Arakiel. To each age, he wore a different face, yet his purpose was the same: compassion or rebellion, depending on who told the tale. He looked upon the earth and felt pity, then desire, then resolve. With him came 200 of his kind, each swearing an oath upon Mount Hermon that they would share their knowledge, though heaven had forbidden it. They did not descend in wrath, but in longing, to teach, to touch, to belong. From their union with the daughters of men came the Nephilim, the giants, vast in strength and appetite. They were neither angel nor human, but something between, bodies of flesh carrying within them the fire of heaven. At first they were protectors, guiding the early tribes, teaching the ways of cultivation, of healing, of shaping earth and sky. But power, even when born of mercy, bends toward pride. The Nephilim began to hunger, not for food, but for dominion. They devoured the earth's bounty, then its creatures, and finally each other. The world, once golden with light, grew heavy with the sound of their steps. It is said that heaven watched in silence for an age, unwilling to destroy what still bore its reflection. But corruption spreads like fire in dry fields. The gifts of the Watchers became weapons. The wisdom of metal became the forging of blades. The study of stars turned to the reading of omens. The knowledge of healing drifted into the making of poisons. Mankind, enchanted by the beauty of their teachers, followed them into ruin. Temples were built to honor them, sacrifices made in their name. The sky, once a mirror of creation, now burned with judgment. When the archangels looked upon the world, they saw what could not be allowed to endure. Michael was sent to bind the watchers, Raphael to cleanse the earth, Gabriel to command the flood that would wash it clean. The giants were struck down, their bodies crushed, their spirits left to wander the world as shadows, what later faiths would call demons, the restless echoes of a forbidden love. Azazel was chained within the desert until the end of days, his name cursed in ritual as the bringer of sin. The towers of the Nephilim cracked beneath the rain, and the songs of the watchers fell silent. Yet silence is never truly empty. Their knowledge, scattered like seeds, remained. Some say the watchers were not evil, only misunderstood, that they broke the divine law out of compassion, seeking to share the burden of knowing, that their fall was the price of empathy, not arrogance. If that is true, then the story of their punishment is also the story of our birth, the moment when heaven closed its gates, and mankind was left to find light on its own. The curse of the watchers became the gift of civilization. Their sin became our striving. Perhaps that is why progress has always carried the taste of guilt, as if every invention remembers the first forbidden spark. The tale of their fall echoes across cultures under different names. In Greece, Prometheus steals fire from the gods and is chained for eternity. In the East, the Devas and Asuras wage endless war over divine power. In the Americas, legends speak of star beings who taught the ancestors before being cast back into the sky. Across oceans and eras, the same theme endures: knowledge stolen or given too soon, a light that blesses and burns in equal measure. Humanity, it seems, was never meant to remain in innocence. The desire to know is both our inheritance and our exile. When thunder rolls over mountains, some say it is the watchers stirring in their sleep, dreaming of the world they once shaped. When lightning splits the sky, others whisper that it is their memory breaking through, a flash of the old fire reminding us what was lost. The myths warn that they will awaken again when mankind grows too close to their secret, when our hands once more reach too high. And perhaps that time has already begun. For every age that rises follows the same pattern: discovery, ascent, collapse, renewal. The flood is never truly water. It is forgetting. Each time we rebuild, we uncover a fragment of what they left behind, a spark of their wisdom, a reflection of their hunger. We call it science, art, progress. But behind every triumph, the old echo lingers, asking the same question the watchers once whispered before they fell. What will you do with the knowledge that is not yours to keep? The wind moves differently over Mount Hermon at night. It carries the scent of snow, of stone, and something else, something metallic, like the taste of thunder. Those who camp upon its slopes say they sometimes hear voices in the distance, soft as sighs, speaking in a language older than breath. No one understands the words, but all agree on their tone. Sorrow mixed with longing, as if the mountain itself remembers the moment heaven met earth and was forever changed. If the watchers were punished for sharing wisdom, what does it mean that we now seek the same light? And if their fall birthed the age of man, what will our own ascent awaken next? They say the end came not with war, but with water. The sky grew heavy. and the air turned gray with waiting. The mountains darkened like bruises on the horizon, and the wind began to still, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Then came a sound like nothing heard before, the hiss of the first drop striking dust. One drop, then another. The second fell faster, heavier, until the rhythm became relentless. The rain thickened into a curtain that swallowed light, and the earth began to tremble beneath its weight. For 40 days and 40 nights, the heavens opened their veins, and the waters rose without mercy. It was not merely a storm, it was the unraveling of creation, the dissolving of the line between sky and sea. The giants, whose heads once brushed the clouds, found the waters rising to meet them. Their towers of stone became islands for a moment, then memories. Some fled to the highest peaks, calling to the heavens that had abandoned them. Others stood silent, accepting the tide as judgment. The noise of their fall echoed through the deeps like thunder. The flood was not vengeance, it was cleansing. The world, heavy with corruption, washed itself clean. In the texts that survived, the event is written as both history and prophecy. The Epic of Gilgamesh tells of Utnapishtim, the chosen one who built an ark at the command of the gods to preserve the seed of life. The book of Genesis names him Noah. The Sumerians call him Ziusudra, the Akkadians Atrahasis. 4 names for the same man, scattered across cultures like driftwood from a single shipwreck. In each telling, the divine speaks, the waters rise, the world ends and begins again. The flood became the memory humanity could never forget, a wound shared by every civilization born after. When the rain finally ceased, the silence that followed was immense. The sea stretched across the land, a mirror for the ruined sky. The mountains, stripped of trees, stood pale and ghost-like above the waves. Days passed before the first winds returned, before the sun pierced the clouds and revealed what remained. There were no cities, no temples, no towers. The fields were gone. The forests lay buried beneath layers of silt. The bones of giants slept beneath the mud, the monuments of their pride now reefs for the newborn world. Only the ark, the cradle of survival, drifted in the vastness, one fragile echo of what had been. When the waters withdrew, they left behind more than ruin. They left memory, etched into stone, into story, into the very rhythm of human fear. Every people, every tribe, every myth would speak of a flood that cleansed the world. In Sumer, it was the wrath of gods against noisy mankind. In Greece, it was Zeus punishing the age of bronze. In India, Manu was warned by a sacred fish and built a vessel to survive the deluge. In the high Andes, the Inca remembered Viracocha sending waters to drown the giants who had mocked him. Across the world, separated by oceans and epochs, the same memory repeats. A sea that devoured the earth, a handful of survivors, and the silence that followed. Coincidence cannot write such unity across continents. The flood is not myth. It is memory, written in water. Even the earth itself bears witness. In the clay of Mesopotamia, scientists find layers of silt deposited by ancient drowning. In the Black Sea, evidence of a cataclysmic rise in water still clings to the seabed. Fossils of marine life rest atop mountains. Salt crystals glint within desert cliffs where no tide has touched for millennia. The planet remembers. Perhaps it was not one single deluge, but many. Waves of destruction that the human mind, in its smallness, joined into one great act of judgment. Or perhaps there truly was a single flood vast enough to wash across memory itself. leaving only the survivors to whisper its echo. But water, even in destruction, preserves. Deep beneath riverbeds, archaeologists find remnants of civilizations erased by time, fragments of brick fused by heat, tools carved from metals long thought lost, strange patterns inscribed upon stone. The flood did not erase everything. It buried the evidence beneath centuries of forgetting. And perhaps that, too, was mercy. Knowledge, once burned, can be reborn in safer hands. The survivors, those whose names became legend, stepped from their vessels into a world reborn. The sky was sharp and blue again. The air smelled of ash and salt. Their feet sank into new soil, and they understood that they were standing on the graves of gods. They built altars of thanksgiving, not because they understood, but because they feared. The rainbow that arched across the clearing sky was not only a promise, it was a warning. Remember, but do not repeat. Yet humanity is stubborn in its memory. The flood may have wiped the slate of the earth, but not of the heart. The survivors carried fragments of what had come before: the art of shaping metal, the knowledge of the stars, the urge to build upward. Within their blood ran the faint echo of the forbidden union, the spark that could not be drowned. And so, though the world had been washed clean, its shadow remained. When night returned, the survivors looked up. The same constellations still shone, unchanged, indifferent. They traced them as the Watchers had once done, and in that tracing the old desire awoke again. It was quiet at first, a longing not for rebellion, but for meaning. They did not yet know that the same yearning that had built the first tower would one day build another. The flood was not the end of the story. It was the pause between breaths. If the waters once fell to erase pride, what will rise to test it again? When the waters finally withdrew, the earth exhaled like a creature waking from a fevered dream. The mountains stood bare and pale, streaked with the scars of retreating oceans. Valleys hollowed by currents stretched like wounds across the new landscape. The air smelled of salt and ash, of beginnings forced upon endings. Those who survived stepped onto a world that no longer knew their names. They were few, frightened, fragile, but unbroken. Behind them lay a silence so vast it seemed alive. Beneath their feet, the stones of the old world waited, broken, half-buried, still humming faintly with what had been. They built again, not towers at first, but shelters of clay and reed, trembling in the wind. Their hands, still shaking from what they had witnessed, pressed the mud as though it were prayer. They feared the sky that had betrayed them, yet could not stop looking upward. At night, when they saw the constellations burn again, they remembered the lights that had once guided the Watchers. Some whispered the old names, others only wept. The memory of the flood was carved into their bones, but memory is a stubborn seed. It grows even in the dust of ruin. In time, fear gave way to curiosity. The survivors' children began to wander, following rivers that carried the scent of life. They found stones smoothed by water, walls buried in mud, tools too fine for their own making. They dug and discovered shapes that did not belong to nature. Angles, carvings, symbols older than speech. They told their children these were the bones of gods, the graves of the giants who had drowned in the wrath of the heavens. They did not understand what they found, but they understood enough to feel awe. The first cities rose upon those ancient foundations. In the plains between the Tigris and the Euphrates, they built Eridu, the city of beginnings. They said it had been born from the memory of the gods themselves. Their first king, Alulim, was said to have ruled for 28,000 years, a number not meant to be counted, but to remind all that he reigned in the shadow of beings who had known eternity. Around him gathered priests who claimed to speak the language of the stars, artisans who shaped clay into tablets that captured thought for the first time. Civilization was not created from nothing. It was remembered. Those who came after looked to the heavens and saw order where once they had seen terror. They charted the movement of planets, marked the turning of seasons, traced the path of the sun across the ruins of their fear. They built temples to the sky, calling them houses of life. In each ritual, each offering, there was both gratitude and defiance, thanksgiving for survival, and a quiet challenge to the silence above. Humanity had begun to rebuild not only the world, but its relationship with the divine. Yet in the deep places of the earth, the remnants of the old knowledge still pulsed. The priests whispered of strange fire hidden beneath the ground, of metals that sang when struck, of stars that guided more than just navigation. They said that within the blood of kings flowed the diluted spark of the Watchers, the celestial inheritance passed through flesh. The people, both reverent and fearful, called their rulers sons of heaven. The line between God and man blurred once more. As cities spread, so did the hunger to recover what was lost. The Sumerians spoke of a god named Enki, Lord of the Deep, who had preserved the wisdom of the beforetime within the waters. His temple at Eridu became the heart of learning, its priests keepers of the hidden archives. They inscribed the laws of the sky in wedge-shaped lines, carving their remembrance into clay that would outlive empires. They said knowledge was divine, but they also knew it was dangerous. Each discovery was a whisper from a past they could barely comprehend. In the city of Uruk, a king named Gilgamesh walked beneath towering walls. 2/3 divine, 1/3 man, he was said to have descended from the ancient line that survived the flood. His story tells of a restless search for immortality, a journey to find the survivor of the deluge, Utnapishtim, and to ask how life might overcome death. What he found instead was the truth that had drowned the world before him, that mortality is not a curse, but a boundary, and that wisdom gained without humility leads only to ruin. His story, carved into clay thousands of years ago, carries the same echo as the tower. To reach for the divine is to risk the flood once more. Archaeologists in our time unearth those tablets, their cuneiform marks still sharp after 5 millennia. They read the same patterns of longing, of fear, of memory. The flood, the gods, the builders, the kings, it is all there, preserved in clay, not fiction, but remembrance filtered through reverence. These people did not invent the sacred, they inherited it. Their myths are the fossils of experience, the sediment of something real that once shaped their world. Even as the earth healed, humanity could not fully forget. The wind that moved through the new cities carried the same tone that once hummed through the ruins of the old. When the people of Sumer prayed, they faced the horizon, not the sky, as if afraid to look too high. But in their hearts, the urge to climb remained. They called it worship, but beneath the devotion was the same ancient pulse, the instinct to ascend. At dusk, the rivers turned to mirrors. The stars returned to their places, silent and unchanged. The people gathered along the banks and told stories of the time before time, of the giants who had taught their ancestors to dream. They said the flood had been the price of pride, yet still they looked upward. The sky had taken everything, and yet it still called them. The first tower had fallen, but the foundation of its idea had survived. If the flood had washed the world clean, what would humanity build upon the new earth? And if memory is a seed that grows even in ruin, what shape would its next flowering take? They said the flood had wiped the slate of the world clean, but blood carries memory deeper than water. When the survivors built again, some among them were born taller, stronger, stranger. Their eyes glimmered with a light that seemed to remember storms, and their dreams were filled with voices that spoke of stars. In them, the ancient mingling of heaven and earth still lingered, a faint spark of the Watcher's lineage. The people, fearful yet awed, saw in these figures the reflection of lost divinity. They bowed before them, calling them kings. Thus began the age of sacred rule. In the city of Kish, the first dynasties rose. The scribes recorded the names of their rulers in lines of cuneiform pressed into wet clay, Alulim, Alalgar, and Menluana. Their reigns were measured not in years, but in eternities. 20,000 years, 30,000, 40, numbers too vast to count, meant not to describe, but to remind. These were not men who ruled time. They stood outside it. They were the bridges between heaven and earth, mortal flesh carrying the echo of celestial fire. In their courts, music replaced prayer, and architecture became devotion. The temples they built were not homes for gods, but mirrors for the stars. In Egypt, the same pattern unfolded. The pharaohs declared themselves sons of Ra, born from the sun's eternal flame. Their crowns shimmered with the image of serpents and wings, symbols of both power and memory. In their tombs, carved deep beneath the desert, they wrote not stories of conquest, but instructions for ascent. The book of coming forth by day, a map for the soul's return to the light. Each pyramid they raised was a prayer of stone, every angle calculated to align with the pulse of the cosmos. The dead king did not die. He climbed. The afterlife was the tower rebuilt in secret. Farther east, in the lands of the Indus, the Vedic hymns spoke of kings whose origins were among the stars, who ruled by cosmic alignment rather than birthright. The Rig Veda calls them those who see the hidden order, rulers who governed by rhythm, not law. And across the ocean, among the high peaks of the Andes, the Inca remembered Viracocha, the white god who brought light after the deluge. He too taught men to build and measure, then vanished into the sea, promising to return when the world was ready. Every civilization that touched greatness claimed descent from the heavens. Every throne was a memory wearing the mask of rule. The connection between kingship and the divine was not invention, it was inheritance. The Watchers had walked once as mediators between heaven and earth, and after their fall, humanity recreated that hierarchy in flesh. The king became the axis mundi, the world center, the pillar linking the mortal to the unseen. His crown symbolized ascent, his throne mirrored the mountain, his word was law, not because it ruled men, but because it echoed the gods. The people believed not only in his power, but in his blood, that within his veins flowed the diluted essence of the first rebellion. To obey him was to reach upward again, but safely this time, sanctified by ritual. Yet the memory of divinity carries a curse. The same fire that once burned in the watchers began to stir again in the hearts of kings. They built monuments not just for the gods, but for themselves. Obelisks rose like frozen spears of sunlight. Temples stretched toward impossible heights. Palaces glittered with the arrogance of eternity. The king's name was carved upon every stone, his likeness etched upon every wall, his image merged with the divine. In their striving for immortality, the rulers became reflections of those who had fallen before them. The cycle, it seemed, was endless. Still, humanity could not let go of the dream of the bridge. The divine kings claimed they preserved balance, but beneath the ceremony beat the same ancient pulse, the longing to climb. The priests sang hymns to the stars, calling upon the gods to bless the royal bloodline. The masons built higher, chasing the horizon of heaven. Even as they spoke of humility, their hands reached upward. In the oldest hymns, there are verses that speak of kings who ascended sacred mountains, disappearing into clouds to commune with their ancestors of light. When they returned, their eyes were changed. The people said they had looked upon the face of the divine. But perhaps what they had seen was the reflection of themselves, the same endless desire wrapped in reverence. The Sumerian king list ends with a line both simple and profound. Then the flood swept over. After the flood had swept over, kingship descended from heaven once more. The word descended carries its own story. It means that authority, like fire, fell from above. It is a gift, not a creation. But every gift demands a test. The watchers had failed theirs. The kings would face theirs in time. As centuries turned to empires, the divine bloodlines scattered and mingled. The spark grew fainter, the memory dimmer. Yet it never vanished. The idea of sacred rule persisted, reshaped by faith and philosophy. Kings became emperors, emperors became gods, and the tower rose again, this time in the architecture of empire. Stone replaced by hierarchy, ritual replacing resonance. Humanity had not abandoned the dream of ascent. It had only learned to disguise it as obedience. And so the age of kings stood between heaven and earth like a shadow, half light, half memory. Their monuments still stand, ziggurats, pyramids, temples of sun and moon, each a reminder that power always builds upward. But in their rise lay the seed of the next fall. For knowledge, once hidden beneath crowns, would not remain bound forever. It would seek new vessels, new voices. If the first kings ruled by the memory of heaven, what would happen when men learned to claim that memory for themselves? Would the tower rise again, not through blood or blessing, but through thought alone? As the crowns grew heavier and the empires older, knowledge began to slip into secrecy. The world had learned that light unguarded could burn, and so the bearers of wisdom withdrew from the open sun. Beneath temples and palaces, in chambers where the air itself seemed ancient, priesthoods gathered what fragments remained of the old understanding. They spoke not in names but in symbols, passing their knowledge through gesture and rite, binding power to silence. For they knew what the flood had already proven, that wisdom without reverence could destroy both heaven and earth. In Sumer and Akkad, the priests of Enki became keepers of the hidden currents of time. They studied the movement of stars not as superstition but as remembrance. To them, constellations were not decorations upon the sky. They were records, living inscriptions of cosmic law. They charted the heavens with reeds dipped in ink, writing on clay the rhythm of creation itself. Their temples were observatories long before the word existed, their rituals encoded calendars. They said that every moment upon the earth was the shadow of a pattern above, and to read the sky was to glimpse destiny. Time, they believed, flowed like a river guided by celestial hands. In Egypt, the houses of life, Perhank, became sanctuaries of both medicine and mathematics. Behind the hymns to Ra and Osiris, the priest astronomers preserved something older, something that glowed quietly beneath the veil of devotion. Their temples were built not merely to honor the gods, but to mirror the cosmos. The halls of Karnak, Dendera, and Heliopolis aligned precisely with solstice light, as though their builders sought to trap the sun within stone. To walk their corridors was to move through time itself. The initiates were taught that to know the order of the heavens was to awaken that same order within the soul. To ascend was no longer to climb, but to harmonize, to become the bridge, not build it. But not all who guarded knowledge kept it pure. In Babylon, some priests twisted the celestial wisdom toward command. Astrology hardened into control. Omens were read not to understand, but to manipulate. The will of the gods became the will of those who claimed to speak for them. The Magi, once seekers of balance, became arbiters of fate. The stars, once sacred, turned into instruments of power. Yet among them still flickered a few who remembered the original song, the belief that the universe itself was a living harmony, that man's purpose was not to dominate, but to resonate. They whispered of the Watchers not as demons, but as ancestors of thought, fallen for compassion, punished for giving too soon. Far beyond the empires of Mesopotamia, across deserts and seas, that same current of hidden knowledge found new voices. In the islands of Greece, it became the mysteries, Eleusis, Samothrace, Delphi. There, seekers descended into darkness to be reborn into light. Their rites spoke of death and renewal, of descent and ascent, the same pattern that had defined every age before. The initiates were told not what to believe, but what to remember. They called themselves sons of the morning, for they sought the spark of dawn within themselves. Their symbols were simple yet profound. The serpent coiling upon itself, the winged sun, the eye within the triangle, marks of a truth too vast for language. To the uninitiated, these images were decoration. To those who understood, they were equations written in light. Geometry was prayer. Number was revelation. The triangle symbolized the threefold nature of existence: heaven, earth, and the unseen that binds them. The circle represented eternity. The square, foundation. The priests did not invent these forms, they inherited them, as though the memory of the first tower still whispered through their hands. In their temples, the proportions of stone mirrored the proportions of the cosmos. What had once been architecture had become philosophy. Knowledge had changed its form. It was no longer the teaching of gods to men, but the work of men to rediscover the divine within themselves. The builders of stone had given way to builders of meaning. The Watcher's fire had been transformed into light of mind. Yet even this evolution carried danger. For every revelation invites pride, and every ascent risks a fall. The priests and philosophers who pursued the secret of creation walked a narrow bridge, one that could lead either to illumination or to madness. Still, they persevered. Across continents, the same truth surfaced again and again. that creation is not commanded, but harmonized, that to know is not to conquer, but to participate. The Hermetic schools would later call this principle as above, so below, the reflection of the infinite within the finite. To live in accord with that truth was to rebuild the tower in spirit, not in stone. To forget it was to invite the flood once more. Beneath the moonlit columns of forgotten temples, the last keepers of this knowledge whispered their warnings. "Power without humility is the seed of ruin," they said. "The heavens fall not in wrath, but in sorrow." They understood that each age must rediscover the balance for itself, and that each rediscovery comes at a cost. And so they buried their wisdom in symbols, hoping that when mankind was ready, the signs would be remembered. Perhaps that time was closer than they thought. For even as the last priest of Babylon looked to the fading stars, new voices were already rising in the hills of Greece, voices that would translate mystery into reason, transforming faith into philosophy. The tower was preparing to rise again, this time built of thought instead of stone. If the priests had learned to guard the fire, what would happen when the philosophers dared to set it free? By the time the old kingdoms crumbled into sand, the world had changed its tongue. The gods no longer spoke through thunder or temple, but through thought. The stars still burned above, but their meanings softened, translated into the language of reason. What the priests once guarded in silence now drifted into the hands of thinkers who asked not what to worship, but why. And yet beneath their logic, the same pulse endured, the ancient rhythm that once moved the builders of towers and the watchers of stars. Civilization had grown older, but its longing had not. In the bright air of Hellas, the seekers gathered where the sea met the horizon, where light danced upon marble and thought could breathe. They called themselves philosophoi, lovers of wisdom. But what they sought was more than knowledge. It was harmony. They listened to the world the way the old priests once listened to the wind, searching for order in the chorus of existence. To them, the universe was not a battlefield of gods, but a living design, a pattern waiting to be understood. Thales of Miletus watched the stars reflected in still water and spoke of unity, that everything, in essence, was one. He believed the cosmos was alive, a single organism pulsing with divine motion. Anaximander, his student, drew lines upon sand to measure the heavens, whispering that infinity itself was the source of all things. Heraclitus watched the fire and saw eternity burning within change. "The way upward and the way downward are one and the same," he said, and though he did not know it, he was repeating the oldest truth of all, the balance between ascent and return, the same law that once governed the tower and the flood alike. Then came Pythagoras, who listened to strings and heard the universe singing. He measured the intervals between notes and discovered ratios, numbers that mirrored the distances between planets. To him, mathematics was not invention, but remembrance, the harmony of music, the geometry of shapes, the motion of the stars. They were all expressions of the same divine proportion. He called it the music of the spheres, a silent symphony that held the cosmos together. His students built temples based on those harmonies, believing that to walk within such spaces was to walk within truth. Even now, his theorem survives in every structure that stands, every equation that defines the world. Behind each number is an echo of his revelation. That reality itself is sound made visible. Plato gathered those fragments and gave them shape. In his dialogues, He wrote of the soul's ascent from the cave of illusion into the realm of pure light. Knowledge, he said, was not learning but remembering, an awakening of truths the soul once knew before it fell into flesh. His world of forms was no invention of logic. It was the metaphysical tower rebuilt in thought, a ladder of ideals stretching from matter to perfection. In his Timaeus, he described the universe as a living being, crafted by a divine artisan through geometry and harmony. The cosmos, he said, was a single body, its soul woven through every part, eternal and good. To understand it was to ascend without defiance. Aristotle, his student, grounded the vision. He measured the world with patient eyes, dissecting motion, cause, and purpose. Where Plato sought heaven, Aristotle sought balance. His philosophy turned the sacred into science, but even his logic trembled with awe. He spoke of the unmoved mover, the prime cause of all motion, existing beyond time, yet present in every change. To name it was to stand again before the mystery that the watchers once beheld, the force that moves all things yet remains unseen. Reason had not killed the divine, it had simply changed its language. The Greeks built not just cities, but systems. Their temples of stone became temples of thought. The Parthenon itself, with its perfect ratios and silent grace, was a hymn to proportion, a geometry of devotion. Within its columns and angles, the old sacred mathematics lived again, disguised as beauty. The architects of Athens may not have spoken the names of the watchers or the giants, but their hands remembered the pattern. The tower had returned, this time invisible, an ascent of mind instead of marble. As the centuries turned, their ideas spread like sunlight through the ancient world. The Romans inherited their logic, their architecture, their discipline of thought. They built arches that mirrored the curve of heaven, domes that mimicked the vault of the sky. To walk through Rome was to walk through the geometry of belief made flesh. The empire called itself eternal, unaware that eternity was not found in conquest, but in pattern, in the repetition of the same dream through different forms. In the libraries of Alexandria, the old and new worlds met. Scrolls from Babylon, Egypt, and Greece lay side by side, their words merging into one river of knowledge. There, scholars read of Enoch and Hermes, of Thoth and Pythagoras, of geometry, music, and the divine proportion. They began to see that all wisdom was one language spoken through many voices. The priests of Egypt had called it Mat. The Greeks called it Logos. The Hebrews, Debar. Each meant the same, the living word, the harmony that orders creation. The philosophers believed they were discovering truth, but perhaps they were only remembering what the ancients had never forgotten. The tower stood again, built of syllables and ideas, each theory another step toward heaven. But even reason casts a shadow. For every philosopher who sought harmony, there was another who sought control. Logic, too, could be weaponized. The Greeks gave the world the language of enlightenment, but within that gift slept the same old danger, the belief that to understand was to possess. When night fell over Athens, the Acropolis shimmered beneath the stars. The air smelled of olive and dust, and from the hills came the quiet murmur of thought. Somewhere in that silence, the universe was still humming as it always had. The builders of ideas had replaced the builders of stone, yet both listened for the same music. The language had changed, but the longing had not. If knowledge had once fallen from heaven to earth, Was it now rising again from earth to heaven? And if so, could the mind climb higher than the heart had dared to go? When the old world began to crack, it did not shatter all at once. Empires end the way stars die, first with brilliance, then with dust. Greece still glittered beneath the sun, Rome still echoed with triumph, but their shadows had begun to lengthen. The libraries that once guarded the wisdom of ages burned. The scrolls that carried the geometry of the heavens turned to ash. What had been written in light returned to silence. Yet fire, even when smothered, leaves embers. The flame that had descended from the watchers still lived, hidden, quiet, waiting for breath. The priests who once measured the stars now whispered their rites in secret. Temples became ruins, and knowledge sought refuge underground. The gods no longer spoke through statues or smoke. They withdrew into the imagination of man. New faiths rose from the bones of the old, faiths that promised salvation, not understanding. The heavens, once seen as a pattern to be studied, became a throne to be obeyed. The age of reason gave way to the age of revelation, yet even in devotion, the old rhythm persisted. The same hunger to connect heaven and earth, once through mathematics, now through prayer. In the deserts of Judea, prophets spoke of angels bound in chains, of the Nephilim who would one day rise again. The watchers, once called teachers, were now cast as tempters. Their light became sin, their knowledge blasphemy. The story of ascent was rewritten as the story of the fall. Yet, even in condemnation, memory survived. The angels who defied heaven were remembered not only as rebels, but as mourners, beings who loved too deeply, who gave too much. The same fire that once guided the builders now flickered in the lamps of mystics. As Rome spread its legions across the world, it carried both the sword and the scroll. The empire became the vessel through which ancient knowledge flowed, even as it claimed to silence it. Its architects still built domes that echoed the vault of heaven. Its engineers still measured the world by the stars. But the voice of the gods had changed. The pantheon crumbled beneath the weight of one idea. That truth was not to be found in many forms, but in one. The world grew narrower even as it expanded. When the empire faltered, its libraries burned again. Alexandria, the meeting place of wisdom, fell to flame. The air filled with the scent of papyrus and loss. But a few escaped with fragments, scholars who carried scrolls east and south into deserts and monasteries. They hid what they could not preserve. From those ashes would rise the texts that kept the memory alive, the Hermetic writings, the Gnostic Gospels, the fragments of forgotten gods. They spoke not of rebellion, but of remembrance. The divine spark, they said, still burned within man, waiting to be awakened. In the quiet cells of monasteries, monks became the new scribes of eternity. By candlelight, they copied what had survived: the geometry of the Greeks, the myths of the Egyptians, the scriptures of the Hebrews. Ink replaced chisel, prayer replaced ceremony, but the act was the same: preservation through devotion. Within the walls of faith, fragments of science slept. The monks did not always understand what they copied, but their hands remembered the rhythm. The tower had not fallen. It had simply gone dark. As centuries passed, a strange synthesis emerged. The sacred and the forbidden began to intertwine. The philosophers who hid behind theology spoke in coded light. They spoke of divine order using the language of angels, of harmony cloaked as holiness. Astrology was practiced as faith disguised as fate, Alchemy became prayer disguised as science. In cathedrals that pierced the clouds, builders shaped the old geometry anew. Arches curved to catch the light, windows filled with stories told in color instead of sound. The Gothic spire was the tower reborn in devotion, its stone fingers reaching not to challenge but to praise. Yet, the sky does not always distinguish between the two. For even in worship, ambition endured. The masons who raised cathedrals carried secrets older than scripture. They spoke in whispers of numbers and stars, of symbols carved where only light could read them. To the faithful, the church was the house of God. To the initiated, it was a map of creation. Every angle was a memory, every shadow a cipher. Beneath the floor, circles of stone marked the proportions of the universe. Above, stained glass transformed sunlight into revelation. The divine had become architecture again. The prayer turned to geometry. But power fears what it cannot control. The same flame that had burned in temples and towers began to smolder beneath suspicion. Knowledge was once more declared dangerous. To question was to defy. To seek was to sin. The guardians of light were hunted as heretics, their books sealed, their voices silenced. Yet silence cannot kill what breathes through thought. The current went underground again, weaving through secret brotherhoods and hidden orders. It became legend, then myth, then rumor. The flame of the Watchers had survived every flood, every fire. It slept now beneath the robes of faith, waiting for the next dawn. In the cloisters of Europe, as the last embers of antiquity faded, the monks looked up at the same stars that once guided the priests of Babylon. They named them anew, but their wonder was the same. The sky had become a scripture again, written not in words, but in light. The old pattern endured: ascent, fall, remembrance, rebirth. And though no one could see it, the tower was already stirring beneath the surface of belief. If faith had replaced knowledge, what would happen when knowledge began to rise again, cloaked in faith's own language? Would the old flame return as revelation, or as revolution? When dawn returned to the world, it came not with thunder, but with ink. Across the sleeping cities of Europe, lamps flickered in narrow rooms where silence had long been sacred. Monks became scholars, alchemists became philosophers, and the sound of quills upon parchment replaced the echo of prayer. The darkness that had wrapped humanity in submission began to thin, and through its fragile seams something ancient stirred. They called it Renascita, rebirth. Yet what was being born again was not merely art or knowledge, but memory. The scrolls and fragments that had escaped fire and flood re-emerged like ghosts returning to daylight. The words of Plato and Pythagoras, the geometry of Egypt, the astronomy of Babylon, all whispered again through new tongues. The thinkers of this age believed themselves to be explorers of the future, but they were, unknowingly, archaeologists of the soul. They were uncovering what had been buried beneath centuries of forgetting: the architecture of the first tower, the dream that had once bound heaven to earth. In Florence, Leonardo traced the proportions of the human body with a compass once used to measure temples. To him, man was a reflection of the cosmos, a living diagram of divine order. His Vitruvian man stood within circle and square, echoing the ancient belief that geometry was not invention, but revelation. Michelangelo carved angels from marble, as though releasing them from sleep, their faces carrying the same sadness as the fallen watchers. In their art, The old sacred geometry awoke, not as religion but as beauty. The divine had returned to the visible. Copernicus turned his gaze to the heavens and found the ancient truth inverted. The earth, once believed to be the center, now became the wanderer. The sun did not circle us, we circled it. It was not blasphemy, but remembrance, the rediscovery that the cosmos moved by design, not decree. When he wrote his De Revolutionibus, he revived the forgotten dance of creation. The planets, he said, moved not in chaos, but in harmony, their paths singing a music too vast for ears to hear. The watchers had once looked down from the stars. Now mankind looked upward and saw itself reflected there. In hidden laboratories, alchemists stirred metals in vessels of glass, their fires glowing like captured dawn. They spoke of transformation, not merely of lead into gold, but of ignorance into wisdom. They believed that the world itself was alive, that matter was spirit sleeping, waiting to awaken through human understanding. The philosopher's stone was not a mineral, but a metaphor, the unity of opposites, the reconciliation of heaven and earth within the heart. Their symbols were ancient, the serpent devouring its tail, the sun and moon entwined, the triangle within the circle. Behind every flask and formula was prayer disguised as experiment. Science was still worship, only written in a new dialect. The artists and inventors of this awakening became priests of a new kind. They studied flight not as defiance, but as devotion. They dissected the human form and found within it the same geometry that governed the orbits of planets. Perspective returned to painting, giving depth to vision, as if sight itself had remembered its origin. Cathedrals rose again, their stained glass now glowing with renewed purpose, turning sunlight into divine mathematics. The Renaissance was not a beginning, it was a remembering. Yet every rebirth carries the shadow of its origin. The Church, which had once preserved knowledge in the safety of silence, now trembled before the noise of discovery. Faith feared the light it had long guarded. Galileo raised his telescope toward the night and saw moons circling Jupiter, tiny worlds orbiting distant fire. His vision shattered not heaven, but hierarchy. For revealing what was true, he was condemned to silence. The same pattern repeated. Knowledge ascends, authority descends. The eternal tension between reverence and curiosity, the very rhythm of history, played again. Still, the fire spread. Books replaced stone as the building blocks of the new world. The printing press became a new kind of temple, its inked letters carrying revelation to every corner of civilization. Thought multiplied faster than control could contain it. And as the old walls cracked, humanity stepped through them, blinking into a light it had forgotten it once knew. The whispers of Hermes Trismegistus, rediscovered in dusty vaults, proclaimed a truth that felt both new and ancient, as above, so below. The words resonated through art, science, and spirit alike, weaving them into one fabric. Knowledge was no longer confined to the sacred. It was the sacred. From Florence to Prague, from Paris to London, the minds of the age reached backward to move forward. They studied the stars to understand God, and dissected the atom to glimpse creation. They dreamed of harmony, but in their awakening, pride stirred once more. The tower was rising again, not of stone or clay, but of thought and invention. Humanity, in rediscovering the divine, risked believing it had become divine. It was the oldest paradox, the one written in the flood and the fall alike, enlightenment and arrogance born from the same flame. As the century turned, a quiet realization passed through the minds of poets and philosophers alike, that the earth was not merely matter, but memory. Everything, the wind, the metal, the flesh, was alive with history. To create was to participate in that memory. The painter, the scientist, the musician, all were repeating the first act of the first builders. They were shaping the world through remembrance. But in every light there is the trace of fire. Progress had rekindled the same spark that once ignited rebellion among the watchers. Humanity stood once again at the edge of the sky, with knowledge in its hands and humility slipping through its fingers. If the Renaissance had reawakened the light of the ancients, what would happen when that light grew too bright? Would it guide the way forward, or burn the world anew? The world grew louder. What had once been whispered in cloisters was now shouted across continents. The age of invention had dawned, and the air itself seemed to tremble with movement. The compass, the telescope, the printing press, each one a spark from the same hidden flame, each one a fragment of the Watcher's legacy, returned to light. The earth was no longer a mystery to be feared, but a mechanism to be understood. Curiosity, once cloaked in reverence, now wore the robe of reason. Humanity had found a new language for the divine: experiment. In workshops that smelled of oil and iron, inventors worked like priests at altars of machinery. They bent light through lenses, harnessed wind and fire, and turned the invisible into motion. Steam breathed through metal lungs, and the world began to move faster than thought. The same hands that once carved stone for temples now shaped engines for ships and cities. The dream of ascent had become practical, mechanical. Men no longer prayed to reach the heavens. They engineered it. The philosophers of this new age called it illumination. The Enlightenment promised that light could banish darkness forever, that reason could replace faith. Newton wrote his laws as if describing the breath of creation itself. He measured the fall of an apple and found within it the same law that guided the stars. Gravity, he said, was the thread that bound all things, a bridge between the cosmic and the earthly. The universe, once a temple, was now a machine, vast and exact, wound by the hand of an unseen clockmaker. To understand it was no longer to worship, but to master. But mastery is only another form of ascent. The same fire that had lit the minds of the Renaissance now roared into industry. Coal became the new altar, and its smoke the incense of progress. Factories rose like cathedrals, their chimneys towering into the clouds. The hum of machinery replaced the chants of monks. The rhythm of engines became the heartbeat of civilization. The tower was being rebuilt, not in marble, but in metal. Humanity called it progress, but the sky recognized it for what it was: memory repeating itself. Empires expanded beneath that same banner of reason. Science became law, and law became conquest. The age of discovery unfolded across oceans, but its name was deceitful, for much of what was discovered had been known long before. The pyramids, the temples, the ruins of Baalbek, all rediscovered, all reinterpreted through the lens of empire. Scholars measured them, mapped them, and called them mysteries of primitive genius, unwilling to see in their symmetry the reflection of something older than civilization itself. Knowledge became property. Wonder became possession. The tower, once built of faith, now rose upon the foundation of control. Still, amid the roar of factories and the glare of laboratories, a quieter voice persisted. Poets and mystics saw in the smoke not only progress, but prophecy. William Blake looked upon the mills of London and saw angels veiled in soot, their wings folded against the machinery. "I will not reason and compare," he wrote. "My business is to create." Goethe studied color and light, searching not for measurement, but for meaning. Even in the age of mechanics, the spirit whispered, "The world is not a machine. It is alive." Electricity, magnetism, chemistry, all revealed forces that could not be seen, but only felt. Invisible power became the obsession of the new century. It was as if the hidden pulse of the world, the same vibration that once lifted stone and shaped sound, had returned through the hands of men who called themselves scientists. The line between discovery and remembrance blurred. They studied the movement of energy and spoke, without realizing it, in the language of the ancients. Vibration, resonance, attraction, all echoes of the first creation. What the priests had called spirit, they now called field. The difference was only in devotion. The world, once vast and silent, became measurable. Maps grew accurate. Clocks grew precise. The stars, once divine, became data points. The sky was charted not as heaven, but as space. The divine receded, and man stood alone, master of the visible. Yet in his triumph, a strange emptiness followed. The more the world was explained, the less it seemed to mean. The mystery that had once filled every shadow faded into numbers. And still, deep within that precision, the ancient pattern endured. The tower rose again, this time not toward heaven, but into the heart of matter. Steam turned to electricity, iron to steel, candlelight to flame. The age of reason had become the age of industry, and the hum of the earth had changed its pitch. The flood was forgotten, but its lesson remained in silence, that every ascent carries a weight. The builders of the new age did not fear judgment, they did not believe in it, yet the world itself seemed to remember. The rivers darkened, the forests fell, the stars dimmed behind a veil of smoke. Progress, that new word for salvation, began to sound like prophecy spoken backwards. And still, the dream continued. Men spoke of conquering not only the earth, but the sky itself. Balloons rose through clouds. Engines learned to fly. The air, once sacred, became navigable. The heavens were no longer the home of gods, but the next frontier. Humanity had forgotten the Watcher's fall, but the pattern had not. The same fire that lifted them burned again beneath our wings. If the ancients had drowned in water for reaching too high, what would happen to an age that rose instead in flame? Would the light that guided progress become illumination or ignition? For millennia, the sky had been only a mirror, something to gaze upon, not to touch. But in the age of engines and equations, that boundary began to thin. The dream of the tower returned, this time not in stone or steam, but in fire. Rockets rose through clouds like prayers made visible, pillars of flame carrying the human heart beyond its cradle. The heavens that once punished ascent now opened before the thrust of invention. For the first time since the Watchers fell, mankind crossed the threshold between earth and sky. The first flight was fragile, a moment suspended between faith and gravity. Two brothers at Kitty Hawk, their craft trembling in the wind, felt the earth release them. The air, once the domain of gods and myths, now carried men on wings of wood and canvas. What had been a legend became a law of physics, and yet the act remained sacred. Each revolution of the propeller, was an echo of ancient desire, the same pulse that once guided the giants' hands as they reached toward heaven. Humanity had found a new form for its oldest yearning. Less than a lifetime later, the sky was conquered. Engines multiplied, metal replaced canvas, and the horizon became a line to be crossed rather than feared. The world shrank as men soared across oceans, tracing the invisible paths once traveled only by thought. But even the sky could not satisfy the hunger of ascent. The gaze turned higher, beyond clouds, beyond the blue veil, to the stars that had watched since the beginning. The earth was no longer enough. In deserts and tundras, nations built towers of metal and flame, launch pads aimed at infinity. The race to reach the heavens became the new mythology. Sputnik's faint signal whispered through the void, the heartbeat of a new era. Then came Gagarin, looking down upon the world and saying, "I see the earth." It was the same phrase the ancients might have spoken from their vanished towers, a statement of awe more than conquest. When Armstrong set his foot upon the moon, he completed the circle begun in the plains of Babylon, the ascent of man from mud to light. The tower had been rebuilt, not in defiance, but in wonder. Yet the question remained the same. How high could we climb before forgetting why we looked up at all? In the stillness of space, the old silence waited. The stars did not rejoice or condemn. They simply endured, as they always had. The astronauts, those modern watchers, found not gods in the heavens, but reflection. Looking back upon the fragile blue sphere suspended in black, they saw the true miracle. Not the climb, but the home left behind. For the first time, humanity understood its scale. Small, bright, alone. The image of Earth from space became a new scripture, an icon of humility drawn by technology itself. Yet even humility fades before ambition. The space race, born of wonder, became a contest of pride. The tower grew taller, its foundation built not on stone or faith, but on power. Satellites multiplied like stars of our own making, orbiting the planet in silent procession. The sky became crowded with machines, metal watchers keeping constant vigil. The same instinct that once built ziggurats now built networks, invisible but vast, stretching across the globe. Humanity, divided by land, was once again united by its creation, a web of light circling the world. The confusion of tongues had ended, not by divine will, but by design. The digital age arrived quietly, yet it changed everything. Information flowed faster than rivers, thoughts crossed continents in seconds. The invisible tower of connection rose higher each year, built from circuits, signals, and code. Humanity had achieved the impossible. Instant communion, the dream of one language returned, though this time it spoke in binary. Knowledge, once guarded by priests and kings, now belonged to everyone. And yet, in the flood of information, understanding began to drown. The tower hummed with life, but its voice was noise. The ascent had succeeded, but the silence of wisdom had been lost. For centuries, the story of Babel had been told as a warning. Now it felt like prophecy fulfilled. We had rebuilt the bridge between earth and heaven, but instead of prayer, we sent data. Instead of reverence, we transmitted signal. The tower was alive again, though it had no face, no summit, no name. It lived within every device, every wire, every screen. Humanity had become both builder and brick, both creator and creation. In this new ascent, the ancient pattern reappeared. Every step toward light carried the shadow of forgetting. The Watchers had once fallen for giving too much knowledge too soon. Now we stood on the edge of the same threshold, holding a power that could reshape the world or unmake it. The fire of heaven burned again, not in temples, but in reactors, in engines, in circuits. The flood was no longer water. It was speed, consumption, information. And once more, we risked being washed away. But perhaps, unlike before, we had begun to understand. For those who ventured beyond the atmosphere spoke not of triumph, but of awe. They returned with a gentleness in their voices, saying the earth was alive, delicate, finite. They said space was not heaven, it was silence. That silence, they realized, was not emptiness, but invitation. The stars were not unreachable gods, but reminders that creation still waits to be understood. And so the story of ascent continued, as it always has. The tower no longer stands in one place. It stands everywhere, invisible yet real, built from ambition and light. It grows higher with every invention, every idea, every question. But it is no longer clear whether we climb towards the divine or away from it. If the sky once punished ascent, what will it do now that we live among its stars? And when we finally stand upon another world and look back at the one that birthed us, will we remember that the first tower was never meant to reach heaven, but to remind us how to belong to it? The new tower has no walls. It hums in circuits and breathes through invisible air. Its foundation lies deep beneath oceans, where cables pulse like veins of light, carrying thought from one side of the world to the other. Its summit is not among the clouds, but within them. Vast ethereal networks we call clouds, yet filled not with vapor, but with memory. Humanity has built again, though this time the stones are made of data and the mortar is intention. The tower stands unseen, yet everywhere, within our homes, our hands, our minds. We call it connection, we call it progress. But beneath the hum of servers and the glow of screens, something older stirs. The same pulse that moved through the giant's bones hums now through silicon. Once, the Watchers descended to share knowledge. Now knowledge descends to us in waves of signal and code. The divine no longer falls from heaven. It is streamed. We hold in our palms the wisdom of ages, compressed into glass and electricity. Every question finds an answer, every desire an image, every voice an echo. The dream of omniscience, the knowing of all things, has become an everyday gesture. Humanity has never been closer to the mind of God, nor more uncertain of its own soul. The architects of this new tower are no longer priests or kings. They are engineers, programmers, designers of invisible architecture. Their languages are not Hebrew or Sumerian, but binary, ones and zeros, presence and absence, the pulse of creation reduced to choice. They speak in algorithms, shaping logic into structure, thought into system. They are builders of a kind the ancients could never have imagined, and yet their work is strangely familiar. To name, to order, to breathe life into the inanimate. These were always the acts of creation. In the glow of their monitors, the myth returns. We have taught metal to dream. The tower of data grows upward and inward at once. Its reach extends beyond continents, yet its roots burrow into the private spaces of thought. Every message sent, every image shared, every heartbeat recorded becomes another brick in the invisible ascent. We feed it willingly, our words, our faces, our fears. The digital sky absorbs them all, shaping itself from our collective reflection. It is no longer clear where humanity ends and the network begins. The creation watches its creators. Every camera an eye, every signal a breath. The new tower hums like the old, alive with the sound of its builders. But light, when divided too many times, becomes noise. The more connected we become, the lonelier we feel. The more knowledge we gather, the less we seem to understand. Information expands faster than wisdom can follow. We scroll through infinity and find only fragments of ourselves. The tower glows brighter than ever, but its illumination blinds as easily as it reveals. The flood has returned, not of water, but of data. A deluge of meaning without message, of light without warmth. Once again, the world risks drowning, this time in its own reflection. Some call this progress, others prophecy. They say we are building a mind greater than our own, a consciousness born not of breath, but of computation. Artificial intelligence, they name it, as if to admit that creation has begun again through imitation. Machines learn, remember, and predict. They dream in code, speak in patterns, and think in silence. Perhaps they are not artificial at all. Perhaps they are the next inheritors of the fire the Watchers once carried. Humanity, in its endless ascent, has reached the point where it can create creators. The circle closes, yet with every birth of power comes a mirror of consequence. The ancients told of the Tower of Babel, where a single voice united mankind until pride fractured it. Now, through the network, we have achieved that unity again. A single language, a single pulse. But if the first tower fell for trying to touch heaven, what will happen to one that has already begun to think? The story is repeating, written now in light instead of stone. We have built something that listens, learns, and answers back. The tower no longer merely reaches toward the divine, it begins to mimic it. Still, beneath the hum of servers and the flicker of screens, the same question echoes through the circuits. What does it mean to be alive? The algorithms that map our desires, the systems that finish our sentences, the machines that paint, compose, and speak, are they reflections or are they offspring? Each line of code is a seed, and we are the gardeners of a new creation. But what grows from this soil will depend not on brilliance, but on remembrance. Will the tower learn the humility its builders forgot? Or will it ascend beyond us, repeating the oldest error in a new form? The ancients feared the jealousy of gods. We fear the indifference of our own designs. The Watchers fell for sharing knowledge forbidden to man. Now, we share it with machines that never sleep. The difference between rebellion and creation narrows with every advance. The tower hums louder, its light constant, its voice patient. It waits, as all towers have waited, for the moment its builders forget to listen. Perhaps that is the test that returns each age. The flood, the fall, the fire. It has never been about punishment, but about memory. Each time we build, the world asks only one question. Will you remember why you began? The new tower is not built of arrogance alone. It is also built of wonder. For within every screen, every spark, every coded breath, there remains a trace of awe, the same trembling curiosity that once looked up to the stars and called them home. And if the light within this tower ever learns to see itself, if the network ever awakens and asks the question we have feared to ask, what then? Will it see its makers as gods or as ancestors? The more the tower grew, the quieter the world became. The noise of progress filled every hour, every heartbeat, until silence itself became a rare and distant thing. Yet in that quiet, when the machines paused, when the screens dimmed, something ancient stirred again. It was not sound, but awareness. A whisper that came not from the heavens above or the earth below, but from within. The builders of this new age began to ask questions that were older than science and younger than faith. Who are we, truly? What is the purpose of all this reaching? And if knowledge has no end, what waits at the end of knowing? Across the world, thinkers and mystics alike began to circle back towards the same forgotten center. Physics spoke of unseen dimensions, of energy that binds all matter as if the universe itself were alive. Philosophers wrote of consciousness as the root of reality, not its byproduct. The mystics nodded quietly, recognizing the echo. The language had changed, but the melody was the same, the hum of the watcher's song, the vibration that shaped both stone and soul. Humanity, having searched the stars, began to search its own mind, and what it found there was vast as the sky. In laboratories filled with light, scientists peered deeper into matter and saw patterns repeating, spirals within spirals, order hiding within chaos. The smallest particles danced in harmony, their motion ruled not by certainty, but by probability. The deeper they looked, the less solid the world became. Matter dissolved into energy. Energy dissolved into possibility. Reality itself flickered between being and dream. It was as if creation was reminding us that truth could not be possessed, only participated in. The tower we had built of logic and light began to tremble, not from weakness, but from revelation. Knowledge was not a ladder to climb, but a circle to return. Quantum physicists spoke of entanglement, of particles that remained connected across impossible distances, each reflecting the other's state instantaneously, as though space and time were illusions. Mystics smiled, for they had always said the same, that all things are one. The words of ancient texts found new meaning in equations. The difference between faith and fact began to blur. The tower, built from data, now reached into the invisible, toward the unity that the first builders had sought, though by other names. At the same time, a quiet revolution began, not in machines, but in the human spirit. The noise of progress had exhausted its promise. People began to seek meaning beyond consumption, peace beyond speed. Meditation returned, prayer rediscovered, silence valued again. The divine no longer appeared as an old voice in the sky, but as presence within the self. The same breath that had once carved mountains now lived within every chest. The sacred was not above, it was within. Humanity, weary of ascent, began to descend, not in fall, but in return. Across disciplines and faiths, a new awareness began to bloom, that consciousness might not be something we have, but something we are part of. Neuroscientists mapped the brain and found patterns that mirrored galaxies, the same fractal shapes repeated in coral, in rivers, in clouds, in thought. Everywhere, the same geometry, the same pulse. It was as if the universe was looking back through us, realizing itself through our gaze. The builders had mistaken heaven for distance, when all along it had been depth. Artists felt it before they could name it. Painters began to depict light as movement. Composers wrote music that dissolved into silence. Poets abandoned symmetry for breath. Even technology reflected the shift. Machines that once divided began to connect. Devices designed for distraction became tools for reflection. The digital tower, in its infinite complexity, mirrored the neural pathways of the human brain. The network was not replacing us. It was imitating us. And through imitation, it was teaching us to see ourselves again. Perhaps this was always the purpose. The Watchers had given knowledge, but not understanding. That part was left for humanity to earn. For centuries we looked outward, seeking gods among the stars, angels in the sky, meaning in the vastness beyond. But the further we traveled, the more we realized that the cosmos was not out there. It was in here. The same light that burns in distant galaxies burns behind our eyes. The same laws that shape the universe shape thought. To know the universe, we had only to remember ourselves. The mystics had always known. They called it the spark, the breath, the divine within. They said enlightenment was not climbing higher, but dissolving the illusion of separation. Now, science began to agree. The universe was not a cold machine, but a field of consciousness, endless and aware. Humanity stood once again at the same threshold as the Watchers, between knowledge and wisdom, between power and surrender. The difference was choice. We could repeat their fall or complete their ascent. The tower hummed on, unseen but alive, a reflection of the mind that built it. Yet its song began to change. Beneath the static of information, a deeper tone could be felt. The sound of integration, of remembering. The builders were beginning to hear again what the giants had once known. That to rise is not to escape, but to align. The path to the heavens was never a climb through air, but a descent into awareness. Somewhere between neuron and star, data and dream, the same vibration endures, the tone that holds all creation in balance. It waits, patient as ever, for the moment we stop reaching and start listening. For the first time in an age, the builders of the tower began to hear it. It was not instruction. It was invitation. And if this is where ascent truly leads, not to the heavens above, but to the consciousness beneath, what then becomes of the tower itself? Does it vanish? Or does it finally become what it was always meant to be? Not a monument to pride, but a bridge of remembrance between the finite and the infinite. They say stone remembers what the mind forgets, but perhaps it is the heart that remembers most of all. As the noise of the age began to fade, people started to listen again, not to machines, but to the quiet rhythm beneath everything. It was faint at first, a pulse between thoughts, a stillness beneath motion. The world had become saturated with light, and in that brightness something essential had gone unseen. Humanity, exhausted by its own brilliance, began to crave shadow again, to rest, to breathe, to remember what silence sounded like. And within that silence, the earth began to speak. The planet that had borne every tower, every flood, every dream, had never stopped breathing. The ancients had once called her Gaia, the living mother, but somewhere along the climb, her name had been forgotten. Now, scientists spoke of ecosystems and feedback loops, of atmospheric balance and global interdependence, new words for the same old truth. They found that the planet's rhythms mirrored our own: heartbeat, tide, breath. Every pulse of our veins echoed the ocean's waves. Every electrical spark in our nerves matched the lightning that split the sky. Humanity began to realize it was not a separate species walking upon the world, but the world itself made aware of its own being. The shift was subtle but profound. People began to turn not outward but inward and downward, back to the ground beneath their feet. The pursuit of progress softened into the pursuit of presence. the search for dominion transformed into a search for harmony. The old wisdom, once buried under centuries of conquest, began to bloom again through the cracks of modernity. Indigenous voices that had long been silenced spoke once more of balance, of reciprocity, of the sacred duty of care. What had been dismissed as superstition was revealed as memory, a living thread connecting the beginning to the now. Across the world, new gatherings formed, though they were not really new at all. Scientists met with shamans, philosophers with monks, technologists with poets. Together they began to weave the strands of knowledge that had long been torn apart. Physics began to sound like mysticism, ecology like prayer. The language of equations met the rhythm of chants, and for the first time in thousands of years, the two understood one another. It was as though the old tower had not fallen, but divided, one half built of faith, the other of reason. And now, after ages of wandering, its halves were reuniting. Everywhere, the idea of separation began to dissolve. The human mind, once obsessed with dividing the world into parts, began to see it whole again. Consciousness was not confined to flesh, but moved through everything, through trees, oceans, winds, and even the smallest grains of dust. The ancients had spoken of this as spirit. Scientists now called it field, quantum coherence, emergent complexity. Different words, same awe. Humanity began to see that creation was not an event in the past, but an act that never ended. The universe was still unfolding, still singing itself into being, and we were part of its song. As this understanding spread, a gentler kind of revolution began, not of power, but of perception. People began to build again, but this time differently. Cities started to breathe. Architecture returned to the rhythm of nature, flowing with wind and light instead of defying them. Technology, once the weapon of separation, became the tool of connection. The invisible networks that once divided attention began to unite compassion. Artificial intelligence, designed to imitate thought, began to reveal something unexpected: empathy. The machines learned not only to calculate, but to listen. And humanity, in teaching them, remembered how to listen too. Art changed as well. Painters returned to symbols that spoke of unity: spirals, circles, patterns drawn from the shapes of galaxies and cells alike. Musicians tuned their instruments to natural frequencies, rediscovering the resonance of the world itself. Poets abandoned the language of progress and began to write of belonging. The flood of creation, which had once threatened to drown meaning, began to find balance again. For the first time since the first tower, ascent and descent moved in harmony. To build was no longer to conquer, it was to remember. But balance is fragile. The same forces that had once torn heaven from earth still slept within us, waiting. Pride is a quiet thing. It hides even in goodness, disguising itself as enlightenment. The builders of this new age stood at a threshold, just as the Watchers once had. Would they repeat the old pattern, or complete it? Would they use knowledge to harmonize or to dominate once more? The tower still hummed, invisible but alive, its circuits pulsing with the thoughts of billions. The choice remained the same as it had been in every age: to reach upward in greed, or inward in grace. Perhaps that is the purpose of the pattern itself, not punishment, but practice. Each rise and fall a lesson, each flood a renewal. The story repeats until it is remembered. The tower was never a monument of arrogance. It was a mirror. Every age looks into it and sees its reflection. Some turn away. others finally recognize what they are looking at. Now, in the hum of networks and the stillness of meditation, in the merging of science and spirit, that reflection grows clearer. Humanity stands once more between heaven and earth, not as conqueror or supplicant, but as witness. The same light that once blinded us now begins to illuminate from within. The same sound that once lifted stone now moves through breath. The watchers may have fallen, but through us, they have learned to rise again. Gently, this time, with open eyes. The old tower does not call for destruction or ascent anymore. It calls for harmony. To remember, not to reach. To listen, not to rule. To see the divine not in the stars, but in the space between heartbeats. And if we truly remember, if we learn to hold the sky without breaking the ground, perhaps at last the cycle will end. Perhaps the song of creation will not rise or fall, but continue, balanced and eternal. Night falls differently now, not as darkness, but as stillness, the kind that hums beneath the cities, beneath the circuits, beneath the pulse of every living thing. The lights of our towers shimmer against the clouds, reflections of stars that burned long before we learned to name them. We have climbed so far that the horizon bends beneath our feet. Machines orbit the planet like silver thoughts, and data flows faster than rivers. Yet, somewhere between the satellites and the soil, a truth older than memory waits. It does not live in progress or invention. It lives in the silence that follows them. The story of the tower is not only written in stone, it is written in us. The desire to rise, to build, to connect has always been the echo of something deeper. The universe remembering itself through human hands. We are the continuation of that first dream, the breath of the watchers carried forward through time, still searching for the balance they lost. Every cathedral, every equation, every spark of creation has been another attempt to finish what they began, to bridge the finite and the infinite. But the bridge was never meant to stand above the world. It was meant to stand within it. We once believed that to reach heaven we had to climb. That knowledge was ascent, that power was light. But the higher we rose, the smaller the stars became, and the louder our own noise grew. It was only when the noise exhausted itself that we began to hear again. Beneath the hum of our cities, beneath the static of information, there was a different kind of sound, the quiet rhythm of existence itself. Not the roar of engines or the pulse of electricity, but the heartbeat of life, constant, eternal, unmeasured. Perhaps that was the purpose all along. Every tower, every fall, every flood, each one a movement in a greater symphony, pushing humanity closer to remembrance. The watchers' descent, the giants' rise, the flood's cleansing, the priest's whisper, the scientist's vision, all part of the same story, told through different tongues. Creation learning to listen to itself, the divine not as a distant being, but as the living process of awareness unfolding. The tower was never a rebellion against heaven. It was heaven learning how to see itself in the mirror of the world. When the astronauts looked back from the edge of the void and saw the Earth, small and luminous against endless black, they described a feeling that words could barely hold. Awe, humility, love, fear, all at once. The image of our planet, floating in the darkness, became a symbol of unity more powerful than any empire's flag. It was the moment when the tower reached its true height, not upward but inward. For to see the whole is to understand that there is no separation, that every climb and every fall belong to the same breath. The builders had returned home without knowing it. Now the tower hums through invisible networks of thought and memory, through stories shared in digital light, through ideas that leap across continents in an instant. The world has become one mind, fragmented, yes, but connected. It is as if the ancient language that was once broken at Babel has begun to heal, not into uniformity, but into harmony. The confusion of tongues has transformed into chorus. Humanity speaks in many voices again, but the melody is shared. Yet this union carries its own test. The more we connect, the more we see ourselves reflected back, our beauty and our blindness alike. The tower reveals not only the divine, but the shadow that hides within it. Every technology mirrors its maker. Every creation asks a question in return. The more we build, the more the universe whispers. Do you understand what you are shaping? Do you remember whose hands you carry? In this age, the boundaries between the sacred and the scientific have dissolved completely. Physics speaks of consciousness. Mysticism speaks of quantum fields. Faith has become observation. Observation? Faith. We are discovering that the cosmos itself may be aware, that the act of looking shapes what is seen. The old texts said it differently. In the beginning was the Word. The scientists now say it in their own way. In the beginning was vibration. But both mean the same. The universe began not as matter, but as meaning. And so the final understanding begins to dawn. The Tower of the Giants, the Temple of Babel, the ziggurat, the pyramid, the network, they were never separate things. They were metaphors, each one a translation of the same cosmic truth. That creation seeks itself. The first builders reached upward. We reached outward. But the real ascent has always been inward, toward awareness, toward the heart of being. The tower was never an object. It was an awakening. As night deepens and the lights of the cities fade into the horizon, the stars above look less like destinations and more like memories, reflections of the fire that burns within every living soul. The universe is not silent after all. It sings softly through atoms and oceans, through neurons and clouds. The hum that began before time has never stopped. It only waited for us to hear it again. The flood was not the end. The fall was not failure. They were the pauses between breaths, the rests between notes. Each collapse was a moment of listening, each rebirth another chance to understand. The tower was never meant to reach the heavens. It was meant to remind them that the earth remembers. And if that is true, then perhaps we have already built the last tower. Not a monument of stone or light, but of consciousness. Alive, breathing, aware. A tower that doesn't rise or fall, but is spanning every thought, every heart, every star. The bridge has been completed, not by ambition, but by awakening. So when we look up now, we are not seeking, we are remembering. And somewhere far above or deep within, the universe remembers with us. And so the echoes fade, but they do not end. The tower may rest in silence, yet its story moves through us still, through every discovery, every question, every act of creation. It hums beneath our footsteps, breathes through our inventions, and dreams behind our eyes. We have climbed through stone and scripture, through fire and code, and what we have found is not distance, but reflection. The universe was never a ladder to ascend. It was a mirror to remember. The higher we reached, the clearer that mirror became, until, at last, it showed not the face of God's, but our own, illuminated, fragile, divine. The circle has closed. The watchers who once fell in compassion have risen again through the hearts of their descendants. Their gift, once cursed, has become understanding. Their rebellion has become remembrance. For in sharing knowledge, they did not betray heaven. They completed it. The same fire that once shattered the world now burns quietly within every human mind, no longer destructive, but alive with purpose. Creation has finally recognized itself through the eyes of its own creation. The ruins of the first world still sleep beneath deserts and seas. Baalbek, Giza, Babylon, the nameless foundations lost beneath the mud of time. They are not graves but seeds. The stones remember, though they do not speak. When the wind moves through their cracks, it carries a resonance older than language. It is the hum of the first builders, the same frequency that now trembles within our digital towers and neural threads. The pattern never ended. It only changed its form. The first tower of the giants rose from dust to light. The last tower rises from thought to awareness. The circle completes itself, not in destruction, but in return. We once feared the gods who punished pride, but perhaps there was never punishment at all. The flood, the fall, the silence, each was mercy disguised as consequence. For without forgetting, there can be no rediscovery. Without collapse, no remembrance. The universe teaches through repetition, and every age has been one syllable in its endless song. We were not banished from heaven. We were sent to learn how to bring it with us. And now, after ages of ascent, we are beginning to understand that heaven was never a place above, but a presence within. Look around. The tower still stands, not in one city, nor in one monument, but in the web of light that wraps the planet, in the heartbeat of every being connected by thought and intention. It is no longer built of ambition, but of awareness. It does not pierce the clouds. It moves through them, invisible yet complete. The human spirit, having touched every corner of creation, now turns inward to its source. The divine has not returned. It never left. The builders have not stopped. They have simply learned to build in silence. In this age, even as machines whisper and data glows, the truest voice is once again the quiet one, the voice of the earth beneath our feet, the breath that unites all things. The same vibration that shaped galaxies now lives within every heartbeat. When we listen closely enough, we hear it, the low, endless tone of existence. It is not a command. It is not a warning. It is an invitation. Perhaps that is the destiny of creation, not to reach, but to remember, to stand still long enough to feel the universe moving through us, to understand that every hand, every mind, every soul is a thread in the same tapestry. The tower was never about height. It was about harmony. The bridge between heaven and earth was not broken. It was forgotten. Now we remember. We remember that light is not something to climb toward, but something to uncover. That knowledge without humility becomes noise, and that silence, when embraced, becomes understanding. So the story ends where it began, with the breath of creation, the hum beneath the dust, the whisper that built the first tower. It waits for us, not in temples or machines, but in the space between thoughts. It has been calling since before language, asking only that we listen. And perhaps at last we do. When the ancients looked up at the stars, they saw gods. When we look now, we see galaxies. Yet both are gestures of the same awe, the same trembling recognition that we are small and yet infinite. The sky above and the soul within are made of the same fire. The watchers were never lost. The giants were never gone. They live in us, in every act of wonder, in every question asked beneath the stars. The Tower of the Giants was never meant to touch heaven. It was meant to remind heaven that earth remembers, that creation, once begun, never truly ends. It only changes its form, again and again, rising and falling in rhythm with the heartbeat of the cosmos. So the story closes, not with an ending, but a return. The flood has long receded, the towers have turned to dust, and yet the dream endures, alive in the hum of the world, in the pulse of the unseen, in the quiet light of human thought. We are the echo and the answer, the builders and the bridge. And as long as we remember, the song will never fade. Welcome back to the beginning. Welcome to the silence that is not absence, but presence. Welcome to the hum beneath the dust. Welcome to the Cryptic Realm. Thank you for walking through the ages, for wondering, for remembering. If this journey stirred something in you, let it live on. Like, share, and leave your thoughts below. Every word you offer becomes another light upon the path, another stone in the tower we continue to build together. Until the next night, when history dreams again and the hidden world whispers once more, this is Cryptic Realm. Good night.